The dust hung thick in the air that scorching afternoon in 1887, turning the Kansas sky the color of old pennies. James Hendricks rode his black stallion down the main street of what could barely be called a town, just a handful of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the unforgiving prairie. He'd come to inspect some cattle his foreman had written about, good stock that might improve his already substantial herd back in Wyoming. James was 34 years old and had built his fortune through equal parts hard work and shrewd business sense. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres, and his cattle bore a brand recognized throughout the territory. He wore his prosperity with quiet confidence, well-tailored clothes that somehow never looked out of place even covered in trail dust, a gold watch chain glinting against his vest, and boots made from the finest leather. But despite his wealth, there was a loneliness that followed him like his own shadow. He'd never married, never found a woman who could share the harsh beauty of his life on the frontier. As he dismounted in front of the general store, a sound stopped him cold. It was barely audible above the creaking of wagon wheels and the distant lowing of cattle, a child's whimper, thin and desperate. James turned toward the alley beside the building, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before he realized the sound held no threat, only misery. What he found in that narrow space between buildings would haunt him for the rest of his days. A woman sat slumped against the wooden planks, her dress so faded and patched it was impossible to tell what color it might once have been. She held an infant against her chest, its cries weak and pitiful. Two other children huddled beside her, a boy who might have been 5 and a girl perhaps 7, their faces gaunt, their eyes too large in their shrunken features. All 4 were little more than skeletons draped in skin and rags. James felt his throat tighten. He'd seen hardship before, the frontier was full of it, but this was different. This was the kind of suffering that came from complete abandonment by the world. "Mum." His voice was gentle as he knelt beside them, mindful not to startle her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman's head lifted slowly, as if it took all her remaining strength. Her eyes, once probably bright and full of life, were sunken and dull with exhaustion and despair. She couldn't have been more than 25, but suffering had aged her beyond her years. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Sir, please take my children." The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd heard stories of such things, mothers so desperate they gave away their babies, but he'd never witnessed it firsthand. The boy beside her began to cry, understanding enough to be terrified. The girl simply stared at James with eyes that had seen too much, too young. "I'm dying," the woman continued, each word clearly an effort. "I can feel it. Been 3 days since any of us ate. The baby won't last another night. Please, sir, I can see you're a man of means. Take them. Give them a chance. I'm begging you." James swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could see she was telling the truth about her condition. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of the body beginning to shut down. The children weren't much better off. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. My husband. He went to find work in the mines 6 months ago. Said he'd send money." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. "Never heard from him again. Lost our homestead. Lost everything. Been trying to get to my sister in Missouri, but we ran out of everything before we even got out of Kansas." The baby let out another weak cry, and Sarah looked down at it with such anguish that James felt his chest constrict. She pressed her lips to the infant's forehead, a gesture so tender it seemed to contain all the love in the world despite having no strength behind it. "Her name is Lily," Sarah whispered. "She's only 4 months old. The boy is Thomas, and that's Emma. They're good children. Smart. They deserve better than to die in an alley in some forgotten town. Please, sir. I know I got no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Take them. Raise them. Give them the life I couldn't." James found himself nodding before he'd fully thought through what he was agreeing to. But looking at those 3 small faces, those innocent lives hanging by a thread, he knew there was only one choice to make. He'd spent years building a fortune, but what good was any of it if he couldn't use it to save a dying woman and her children? "I'll take them," he said, his voice firm and clear. Then he added words that surprised even himself. "I'll take you too." Sarah's eyes widened, confusion and disbelief warring in her expression. "Sir, I'm not asking for charity for myself. I just want my babies to live." "I heard what you asked for," James said, already planning in his head. "But I'm not in the business of splitting up families. Besides, you're not as far gone as you think. Few good meals, some rest, proper medical attention, you'll pull through. I've seen men in worse shape make it." He wasn't entirely sure that was true, but he believed in the power of hope, and he could see a tiny spark of it flickering to life in Sarah's eyes. "I can't pay you back," she said, tears beginning to track down her dusty cheeks. "I got nothing. I'm not asking for payment." James stood and called out to a man passing by. "Hey, friend! Run and fetch Doc Morrison. Tell him it's urgent. And ask Mrs. Chen at the restaurant to prepare some broth, something gentle for folks who haven't eaten in days. Tell both of them James Hendricks is paying, and there's extra in it if they hurry." The man, recognizing James's name and the authority in his voice, took off at a run. James turned back to Sarah and her children, carefully scooping up the infant with surprising gentleness for such large, work-roughened hands. "Come on now," he said softly to Thomas and Emma. "Let's get you all somewhere safe." He helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed dangerously. She was lighter than his saddle, he realized with a pang. Emma took her mother's other hand, and Thomas clung to James's coat as they made their way slowly into the street. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Doc Morrison, a gruff but kind man in his 60s, examined all four of them in his small office above the barber shop. His prognosis was guarded but not hopeless. With proper care and nourishment, all of them could recover. The baby was the most fragile, but even little Lily showed signs of resilience when Mrs. Chen managed to get some warm milk into her. James arranged for rooms at the town's only boarding house and sent his men ahead to his ranch with word of his delayed return. He bought clothes, blankets, medicine, everything the doctor recommended and more. The shopkeepers looked at him with curiosity, this wealthy rancher suddenly playing nursemaid to a destitute family, but no one dared question James Hendricks. That night, as Sarah lay in a clean bed for the first time in months, her children fed and sleeping peacefully nearby, she wept. James sat in a chair by the window, still keeping watch, and she reached out a trembling hand toward him. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for strangers?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost distant. "My mother died when I was 8, he said. "Cholera took her and my baby sister both. My father, he tried, but he wasn't the same after. Drank himself to death within 2 years. I was taken in by my uncle, a rancher. He was a hard man, but fair, and he gave me a chance at life when he didn't have to. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to the fact that someone showed me kindness when I needed it most." He turned to look at Sarah, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I swore then that if I ever had the means, I'd pay that kindness forward. I just never thought it would look quite like this." Sarah's tears flowed freely now, but they were different tears, not despair but gratitude, relief, and the first stirrings of hope. "I'll work," she said fiercely. "Soon as I'm strong enough, I'll earn my keep. I can cook, clean, mend, handle accounts. I may not look like much right now, but I'm a hard worker. I won't be a burden on you. We'll figure all that out when you're well," James said gently. "For now, just rest. Let yourself heal. Let your children heal." 3 weeks later, they made the journey to James's ranch in Wyoming. Sarah had gained some weight, color had returned to her cheeks, and her children had transformed from hollow-eyed wraiths to energetic youngsters discovering the joy of having enough to eat. Little Lily had proven to be a fighter, her cries growing stronger each day. The ranch hands were surprised to see their boss return with a woman and 3 children, but James's quiet authority forestalled any gossip. He set Sarah up in one of the guest rooms in his sprawling ranch house and hired a woman from town to help with the children while Sarah continued to regain her strength. As spring turned to summer, something unexpected began to bloom along with the prairie flowers. Sarah proved to be as capable as she'd promised, gradually taking over the management of James's household with efficient grace. She had a quick mind for numbers and helped him organize his accounts, spotting several places where he'd been overpaying suppliers. Her laughter, once unimaginable, began to echo through the house as she played with her children in the garden. And James, who had thought himself content with his solitary life, found himself hurrying home each evening, eager to hear about Sarah's day, to watch Thomas practice his roping skills, to listen to Emma read from the books he'd bought her, to hold baby Lily as she cooed and smiled. The loneliness that had dogged him for years had vanished, replaced by something he'd never expected to find: a family. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful day in Kansas, James and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children were inside, their voices a happy murmur through the open windows. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said quietly. "You've thanked me 100 times, James replied with a smile. "Not for saving our lives, though I'll never stop being grateful for that." She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and bright and full of emotion. "But for giving me back my future. For showing me that even when everything seems lost, there can still be hope. For loving my children like they were your own." James reached over and took her hand, rough calluses meeting rough calluses, two people who'd known hard work and harder times. "They are my own," he said simply. "And so are you if you'll have me. I know it's not conventional, and I know you didn't come here looking for this, but Sarah Mitchell, I'm asking if you'll do me the honor of becoming my wife." Sarah's answer came without hesitation, her smile outshining the sunset. And as they sat there together, planning their future, neither could have imagined that it all started with a desperate whisper in a dusty alley, a mother's last prayer answered by a cowboy with a fortune and a heart big enough to share it.